This was Ernesto Che Guevara, a devoted revolutionary and internationalist who became one of the leaders of the Cuban Revolution and of the struggle against colonialism, neocolonialism, and oppression in the developing world. Until the end of his life, Guevara would hold to the view that as many fronts as possible should be opened in the battle against imperialism. This is why, in April of 1965, as the Congo crisis was unfolding, Che Guevara left for the Congo to fight alongside Lumumba's rebels, as the late Patrice Lumumba's supporters were called, who were fighting against the establishment in the Congo. Unfortunately, as Che Guevara even stated himself, it was a story of failure. In this episode of African Biographics, we cover the story of Ernesto Che Guevara's mission to fight in the Congo and why this mission was an epic fail. The Democratic Republic of the Congo immediately became engulfed in crisis following its independence from Belgium in 1960, and this crisis was exacerbated after the country's first elected Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba, was overthrown and then murdered in January of 1961. In 1964, a new rebellion began in the eastern Congo when armed fighters, known as the Simbas, began to spread across the region. Ironically, Moise Tshombe, who had led the secessionist Katanga province of the Congo, was made prime minister, with his mandate being to defeat these rebels and end other regional revolts. In November of 1964, with the intent of helping the Congolese government crush this uprising, the United States government provided planes to transport Belgian troops and white mercenaries to the Congo. Now, because of the Cold War conflict at the time between the United States and its allies and the Soviet Union and its allies, the situation in the Congo became a major international political crisis. A group of radical African states led by Algeria and Egypt also announced that they would supply the Congolese rebels who were fighting against the government with arms and troops. These radical states also called on others for help, and the Cuban government announced that it would oblige. This is how Ernesto Che Guevara came into the picture. Che Guevara was a prominent communist figure in the Cuban Revolution who went on to become a guerrilla leader in South America. This revolutionary leader was born on 14 June 1928 in Rosario, Argentina. After completing his medical studies at the University of Buenos Aires, Guevara became politically active, first in his native Argentina and then in neighboring Bolivia and Guatemala. In 1955, he met Cuban revolutionary Fidel Castro and his brother Raúl while in Mexico. Che Guevara became part of Fidel Castro's efforts to overthrow the Batista government in Cuba. When Fidel Castro took power in 1959, Guevara became in charge of the La Cabana fortress prison. It is estimated that at least 144 people were executed on Guevara's extrajudicial orders during this time. Later, he became the president of the Cuban National Bank and helped to shift the country's trade relations from the United States to the Soviet Union. In December of 1964, Fidel Castro, then leader of Cuba, sent Che Guevara to represent his country at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. In his well-publicized speech at the United Nations, Che denounced the involvement of the United States government and its allies in the Congo and other parts of Africa. He also reminded the members of the United Nations General Assembly that Patrice Lumumba was murdered following the occupation of the country by a United Nations force that Lumumba himself had requested. In his speech, Guevara also stressed that this force had allowed Lumumba's opponents to capture and kill him with impunity. Che Guevara claimed the United States and other Western imperialist countries used the United Nations to depose Lumumba and kill thousands of Congolese, and that their purpose was to defend white supremacy in Africa and continue Western imperialist control over the Congo's vast mineral resources. It is important to keep in mind that until the end of his life, Guevara held the view that as many fronts as possible should be opened in the battle against imperialism. This is why he soon embarked on the mission to fight alongside the rebels in the Congo. With the objective of making this strategy become reality through establishing and consolidating Cuban relations with radical African governments and liberation movements, Guevara left Cuba in December of 1964 to embark on an Africa tour. Including the nations of Ghana, he also visited Algeria, Congo-Brazzaville, Egypt, and finally Tanzania. It was while in Tanzania that Guevara had the chance to meet one Laurent Desire Kabila, a 26-year-old assembly member from North Katanga a former student in Paris and Belgrade who hoped to establish a provisional government for the liberated territories of the East. When the Lumumbis rebels formed the Council of National Liberation, the CNL, Laurent Kabila was sent to Eastern Congo to help organize a revolution, in particular in the Kivu and North Katanga provinces. This revolution was part of the larger Simba rebellions happening in the provinces at the time. In 1965, Kabila set up a cross-border rebel operation from Kigoma, Tanzania, across Lake Tanganyika. Now, in this meeting in Tanzania, Laurent Kabila made an excellent impression on Guevara. For instance, he made a clear, specific and resolute presentation of the situation in the Congo and realized that the main enemy was Western imperialism. Anyways, during this encounter, Che Guevara promised Kabila that he would provide a group of 30 instructors to help train Congolese rebel forces. On Kabila's insistence, these instructors would be black so as not to arouse suspicion of Cuban help. During his time in Cairo, Egypt, Che Guevara got the chance to meet another Congolese rebel leader, Gaston Somalio, who requested fighters and monetary aid for the Stanleyville Front in the Congo. While there, Che Guevara also met with Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, whom he had fraternal relations with since 1959. The two discussed Che's plan to export the Cuban path of liberation in the Congo. However, Gamal Abdel Nasser discouraged him from embarking on this mission. He even told him that what he wanted to do was merely impossible. Well, Che Guevara did not heed the warning. He was already fully committed to applying his experience with the Cuban Revolution's success to movements all over the world, particularly in the Congo. A few other African leaders who Che Guevara met during this tour also held the same sentiment as Gamal Abdel Nasser. But anyways, Guevara did not heed the warning. He was already committed to applying his experience with the Cuban Revolution's success to movements all over the world. Che Guevara wanted to establish a Cuban-led military training center in the Eastern Congo. He hoped revolutionaries from all over the African continent would come to his base to train and gain valuable fighting skills and experience that they would then take back to their respective countries. In preparation for the Congo expedition, Che removed himself from public view at the end of March of 1965. In the interest of this secrecy and to avoid detection of his movements, Che Guevara was to undergo a physical transformation that would make him unrecognizable even to former comrades. Before leaving Cuba, Che Guevara also wrote a farewell letter to Fidel Castro declaring that he would extend the Cuban Revolution's influence, and also stating that, and I quote, "Other nations are calling for the aid of my modest efforts." When Che Guevara left for the Congo in April of 1965, he led a hand-picked group of mostly black Cuban soldiers so as not to arouse suspicion of Cuban help. Their clandestine mission was carefully planned by Cuban intelligence, which planted a false report in the Dominican Republic that Che Guevara had arrived in that country in April and had been killed shortly thereafter in the civil war going on at the time. So while the United States CIA was looking for evidence of Che's presence in the Dominican Republic, he and his squad were able to leave Cuba, travel to Africa, and enter the Congo with complete secrecy. Meanwhile, Che Guevara entered Tanzania using the name Ramon Benitez and was later referred to by his nom de guerre, Tattoo. For this mission, the main group of rebels that Che Guevara had chose to support operated in the mountains along the western shore of Lake Tanganyika, and this group was led by Laurent Kabila. When Che Guevara entered Tanzania in April of 1965 with the intention of going into the Congo, his presence was unknown to the rebel leaders. By not informing them of his arrival, Che Guevara denied them the opportunity to organize the rebel forces in advance. Unaware that Guevara would be joining the fight in the Congo at that time, Kabila was in Cairo with other members of the CNL. The rebel leaders, including Kabila, were meeting in Cairo to try and reduce the political divisions within their movement. And so this meant that only relatively junior personnel were available to Che Guevara. Nevertheless, on 22 April 1965, Guevara led the secret contingent of 100-odd Cuban soldiers to assist the Congolese rebels. The team set off from Dar es Salaam for Lake Tanganyika, drove south and established a supply base in the lakeside town of Kigoma near the village of Ujiji. They then crossed Lake Tanganyika by boat to the Congo, arriving there on 24 April. Along the way to their main base, they ambushed the roads between the towns of Bendera and Albertville, controlled by Captain Mike Hall, the notorious mercenary who was loyal to Joseph Mobutu, the head of the Congolese army. It would really be an understatement to say that Che Guevara's mission in the Congo was doomed from the very start. There was division at the most basic level. As I alluded to, the first Cuban forces sent to the Congo consisted solely of black Cubans so as not to draw suspicion. However, this plan backfired by casting Che Guevara as an outsider within his closest, most loyal group of soldiers. The Cubans faced another issue that was far more fundamental. Not only were they wary of their leader, but they also lacked faith in the success of their mission. This was because this group of soldiers began their training months prior back in Cuba, not knowing where they would be sent. They were constantly in the dark and completely unprepared for the Congolese terrain that they were to maneuver. Suffice to say that they lacked preparation, motivation, and confidence. On the other hand, the Congolese rebels they were to fight alongside experienced even greater division among themselves. These rebel forces were already divided before Che's arrival. Different leaders and tribes controlled the lands in the center of the country as well as in the east. So not only was the revolution fighting the enemy on too many fronts, but it was also fighting against itself. Not only did Guevara find difficulty in melding Cuban and Congolese soldiers, more importantly, he was unable to unify the local rebel forces that were already fighting and securing territory in the Congo. One of the foundations of Che Guevara's strategy relied on the unity of the people's forces in order to counter the unity of repressive forces. However, he soon realized that his own willingness to share the hardships of the peasant farmers in the Congo were neither matched by the rebel leaders who spent most of their time in Dar es Salaam, nor by members of the rebel forces who would pillage food from the peasants and steal what luxuries they possessed. From the outset, Che Guevara was also disappointed by the behavior of his troops, who many of them had contracted venereal diseases in the brothels of Kigoma. There was also a rift between Cuban troops and Congolese forces. This lack of unity extended to the Rwandan forces that had been sent to support the Congolese. All of this meant that the unification of the forces never came to fruition, and neither did their revolution. One of the major issues that resulted in Che Guevara's mission to the Congo being an epic fail was his lack of knowledge about the spiritual values of the Congolese, which led to frequent misunderstandings and misinterpretations of their actions. For instance, it is said that the Congolese rebels regarded carrying heavy loads as below their dignity and would wander off-board when the Cubans tried to stage ambushes. Che Guevara's guerrilla tactics, such as trench warfare, directly opposed the African worldview. The Congolese would not dig trenches because the trenches were holes, and to the Congolese, holes were for dead bodies. The Congolese troops were also very superstitious. They relied on what is called dawa, which are magic potions whipped up by witch doctors. They believed that the dawa would turn bullets into water and protect combatants from harm. If one soldier was seen to have been killed or injured by a bullet which was supposed to be deflected through protection from this potion, other Congolese forces involved in a battle would flee, believing the dawa to be faulty. This lack of familiarity with the local rebels' spiritual reality caused Che Guevara and the Cuban troops to constantly underestimate the Congolese tribes, provoking mutual distrust and dissension among the allied forces. The argument here is that Che Guevara would have been more successful in leading and uniting the two forces had he taken the element of African spirituality into account. As previously mentioned, Laurent Kabila was not immediately available to meet Che Guevara and his contingent. In fact, 2 months passed before Laurent Kabila and Che Guevara met face to face. And when they eventually met, Che's relationship with Kabila in particular and other rebel leaders in general soon unraveled. Che Guevara soon began to see Laurent Kabila as less than committed to the revolutionary cause. He even made references to Kabila's drinking habits. It is said that Kabila and his local commanders spent days drinking and then had huge meals without disguising what they were up to from the people around them. Drunkenness was widespread in the camp. Consequently, the army spent its time brawling and causing general mayhem. Whereas frequenting brothels and getting drunk are part and parcel of service in the armed forces, when coupled with a strong belief in tribal traditions such as taking a dower to ward off enemy gunfire, this would prove to be a disastrous combination. And so as all of this was taking place, Che Guevara realized that the rebels could not win because of what he termed their corrupt and weak leaders, their failure to organize support among the local population, their distrust of one another, and their hopeless lack of discipline. The rebel leaders even used up petrol on pointless expeditions. When Che Guevara realized a poor example of Laurent Kabila as a leader and how it was affecting the morale of Cubans and Congolese alike, he stated that, and I quote, "Nothing leads me to believe he is the man of the hour." Ultimately, disagreement and lack of communication between Che Guevara and Laurent Kabila stalled the revolution's progress and permitted the enemy enough time to learn of Guevara's presence in the country, allowing them to reevaluate their plans and modify their tactics. By this point, Che Guevara and the Cubans felt depressed and disillusioned. They had all now been ill at one point or another since their arrival. Che Guevara himself suffered from bouts of asthma and malaria. As you can see, many odds did not favor the revolution in the Congo. Another main reason was the Congolese government's abundance of Western support, as well as the organization of African Unity's willingness to compromise with the Congolese government. Around this time, Congo's president Joseph Kasavubu began to recognize that he would never get approval from the OAU if Moise Tshombe continued as prime minister. As a result, he replaced him with Evariste Kimba. The end of Moise Tshombe's regime precipitated a political reconciliation effort that would eventually undermine the rebellion, ending the support it had been receiving from various African states. This change in leadership would sabotage Che Guevara's support in Africa, as it even led to a compromise between Joseph Kasavubu and the Congolese rebel forces leadership. Interestingly though, it was Fidel Castro publicizing Che Guevara's farewell letter in October of 1965 that alienated Guevara from his most loyal supporter. Che Guevara had written this letter to Castro in April of 1965, severing political ties with Cuba in order to have the freedom to embark on this expedition in the Congo. Now Che Guevara was upset that the letter had been disclosed to the public so readily. In a revolution that Guevara estimated would take 5 years to achieve, he was morally defeated when Fidel Castro published this letter after a mere 6 months. It meant that Guevara suddenly found himself in a chaotic revolution without the support of his close friend and advocate. As if this was not enough, on 1 November 1965, Che Guevara received an urgent message from Dar es Salaam warning him that the Tanzanian government had decided to end their support for his Cuban expeditionary force. He even asked for help from China, and Zhou Enlai, the premier of China at the time, advised him to continue building resistance groups but not to enter combat himself. But with no internal African support, Fidel Castro's public denouncement of Guevara and China's unwillingness to intercede, Che Guevara made the call to withdraw his troops and his revolution from the Congo. On 20 November 1965, Che Guevara organized the crossing of Lake Tanganyika back into Tanzania. This retreat took place just a few days before Joseph Mobutu, one of the main backers of Lumumba's execution, was installed as president of the Congo. Following this campaign in the Congo, Che Guevara remained covertly in the Cuban embassy in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania to record his Congo diary. He then retreated to Prague in then Czechoslovakia, where he began planning for his final campaign in Bolivia, which began in October of 1966. Here in Bolivia, he joined guerrilla rebels in an effort to overthrow René Barrientos. Unfortunately, a lack of local support, the arrival of the United States CIA, and a manhunt led by American-trained Bolivian Rangers would bring a swift end to the mission. On 8 October 1967, the Bolivian Rangers captured Che Guevara, and on the following day, he was executed in La Higuera on the order of the military's high command. Don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tatenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.